Welcome into the CHGO Bears Podcast, a special edition as we count down our top 10 Chicago Bears games ever. And this special is presented by our awesome friends at Miller Lite. No matter how your team changes, you can always enjoy the great taste of Miller Lite. Tastes like Miller time. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/CHGO football, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories per 12 ounces. My name is Adam Hoge. He's Mark Carman. He's Greg Braggs Jr., who is filled with an encyclopedia of knowledge of the past Bears games.
I thought you were going to say filled with Miller Lite.
And filled with Miller Lite.
Yes.
I wish we all were filled with Miller Lite right now.
Yes, I'm an encyclopedia for everything post-1985. And Mark Carman's an encyclopedia for everything after 1926.
Yes, I'm here to talk about the Sid Luckman experience and on up to Jim McMahon and Walter Payton. You guys can handle the rest. I don't remember, for whatever reason, recent note.
When you were covering Sid Luckman, did you have one of those, like the hat with the media thing in the hat?
I did.
Like the old school.
I did, and Sid and I were close. He was a great man. I look forward to talking about the 1940 victory over Washington.
Galloping Ghost.
Yeah, all the nonsense they were talking after they had beaten the Bears in the regular season. Then come playoff time, they got their comeuppance. So, and I'll use words like that when we discuss 1940 as much as possible.
Well, we are going to discuss some of the older games, some of the newer games, some of the games in between, which number 10 probably counts as. We're going back a little bit, but not all the way to Sid Luckman. We're talking 1988. Number 10 on our list as we count down is the Fog Bowl, one of the most famous games in NFL history.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it was a playoff game between the Bears and Eagles, December 31st, 1988, and an unexpected blanket of fog that really wasn't that widespread across the city. It just sort of sat over the lakefront, sat over Soldier Field, and nobody could see anything, basically. Late in that game, there was only 2 field goals scored, one by each team in the second half, and the Bears got the playoff victory against the Eagles. And, of course, you had the storylines of this game mattering, too, with it being Mike Ditka versus Buddy Ryan coming back with the Eagles as the head coach to the team that he won a Super Bowl ring with the Bears.
Well, it was a mixture of hot and cold air that day, Adam, and
it was 25 degrees.
It was.
I looked it up.
Honestly, good job on the weather.
Mostly cold air.
Andy Avalos, well done. I should talk about weatherman at the time, which would be like Floyd Kelber. But look, what's painful about those of us who lived through that era was, you knew in 88 that they were past it, that they actually needed the fog to win the game. Randall Cunningham still threw for over 400 yards in that game, but the Bears were able to win it. Their defense was starting to fail at that point. Mike Tomczak was the starting quarterback in that game. McMahon came off the bench because he was banged up, as he always was, threw the ball 3 times. And you had just some rando special Bears making plays. Dennis Gentry and Cap Bozo and my guy Glenn Kozlowski had a big play in that game. But the Bears were like, they were past it, and you knew at that point that they were not a legitimate Super Bowl contender, even though they were in the playoffs and winning playoff games. But the fog helped them.
It's bizarre, right? I mean, you've never seen a game before or after since then where the fog is ever an issue. But then that day, it's not just an issue. Like, how they didn't cancel this, like, or delay the second half. I mean, that's how hard it was to see. So I'm kind of surprised that they even let the game carry on until it, because it's like there's a danger aspect to this too. I mean, you got guys laying each other out. Now you can't see that they're coming.
Well, that's when football was football, Greg. You know,
not this soft era nowadays.
Player safety did not matter. You had complete lunatics back then just running around and trying to take each. I mean, it wasn't the 60s, but it was still the era of when Charles Martin was picking up Jim McMahon and dumping him on the turf there and ending his career essentially, at least his upper level career.
That moment will not make our top 10.
No, it will not. That was the worst moment for me in Bears history because it really did take away what might have been. But you know, it when I look back on it, and I'm like, who was quarterback? And then Mike Tomczak.
But that's why, like, I think the optics of at least getting the win over Buddy Ryan was, you know, definitely part of why this game makes our top 10 list because, you know, I was sort of on the fence about whether or not this should even be on the list, because it's just like, just because it was foggy for a playoff game and the Bears got the victory. But I do think that the Buddy Ryan, Mike Ditka aspect of this
pushes it
definitely matters, especially when you bring up Carman about how this was. You could kind of tell that the Bears had gotten to the top of the plateau and were starting to come down, which was very disappointing at the time, obviously, because when they win 1985 so dominantly, that, you know, everybody in the city thought the Bears were going to be winning 2, 3, maybe 4 Super Bowls, and now just a couple of years later, they're already basically on the back end of this. Still a good football team, but not quite able to really consider themselves Super Bowl contenders, and at least they were able to get this win over Buddy Ryan, because that would have been a really tough reality to sort of take if you lose a playoff game to your former defensive coordinator and sort of everyone understanding, like, all right, well, this dynasty's over.
Right.
And it wasn't a dynasty.
Right.
It was supposed to. This is supposed to be dynasty is now over.
Right. And when we went over this list trying to whittle it down to a top 10, you know, I think we had like 20, 25 games we had listed. And to me, the criteria kind of went through a different arrangement of things where you have, you know, best games in franchise history in terms of like most important. You had best moments, unique moments. So like there's a few different things that I think you have to take into consideration, you know, personal moments, team moments, franchise moments, you know, unique fog moments, you know, and this is one of, it's like you said, one of the most memorable games in NFL history, not just Bears history.
Which is a good transition to number 9 on our list, because this would be considered an emotional moment, but also a game that's part of the Bears' biggest rivalry against the Green Bay Packers. So we go to number 9, what we're calling the Brian Robinson game, November 7th, 1999. Just an emotional week for the entire, not only organization, but city of Chicago, and anybody who considered Walter Payton, you know, an icon and somebody they looked up to, because this was the week that Walter passed away. This was the first game the Bears played after he passed away, and they got to go north up to Lambeau Field, and it's a tight game. It's 14-13, and Ryan Longwell's looking at what seems like a 28-yard chip shot to win the game as time expires, and Brian Robinson is able to get up. Big Brian Robinson is able to get up and block this field goal, and he said afterwards, I think Walter Payton picked me up because I can't jump that high. I just got my hand on that leather. It felt so good. It's for you, Walter.
Well,
put chills, honestly, when you said that.
Yeah.
The Bears had also had a 10-game losing streak to the Packers at the time, which has now become the norm. But that adds to it as well, not only beating Green Bay, but ending that losing streak.
Well, this is a lot of, you know, the Walter tie-in to the first two also, by the way. Like, to the Fog Bowl, he retired the year prior, was his last game. Neil Anderson was the Bears running back that year. And then, you know, of course, he gets sick and passes away, you know, in his 40s, and just the greatest energy competitor, representer, if you will, of the Bears franchise that they literally have ever had. That what Payton left, Payton right, Payton up the middle punt. That's what it was. And we're going to do Marr and Walter coming up here. But, whatever. Nobody knows what happens when we leave this world. So I'm not going to argue with Brian Robinson that maybe he did get up there and gave him a little, he used to love to pinch guys in the ass. So maybe you think that was one of his things.
Give him a little pinch?
He would, that was one of his things in the locker room that he would do.
Yeah.
So maybe he gave him a little, and just pushed him up in a drop.
Yeah.
I think that's how it went down.
Yeah, don't try that move on me. But no, that just what you talk about, like what he meant and the passion he had for this franchise and this city. We just got, a chance to talk to Mike Singletary. We've talked to Doug Plank, Eric Kramer, different players that have played throughout the history of this team. And to not have Walter around, you see guys like Peanut Tillman at House Hall now. And that if Walter was still here with us, that he would still have an impact on this organization and the players coming in. And it would have been nice for him to be able to show that passion and that leadership that he had on the field and off to some of the players that are coming in nowadays, like Caleb Williams and others.
Another small little nugget from that game that the Bears were able to spoil, but Brett Favre was starting his 117th consecutive game that day, which broke Ron Jaworski's record for most consecutive starts in a row by a quarterback. So They were kind of celebrating that up there in Green Bay, and the Bears were able to spoil that with the win.
Right, because he was at the peak of his powers at that point.
Which is why the Bears were on that 10-game losing streak.
Yeah.
Which is, eventually transferred over to Aaron Rodgers and hopefully not Jordan Love now.
We'll get a shot at Favre coming up here in a little bit.
And I know we're talking history, but I think right now the Bears are currently on a 10-game. Is it a 10-game losing streak right now for the Bears and Packers?
I believe so. Yeah.
So maybe lucky number 10. We can get off the schneid this year.
3-5 coming in, 3-game losing streak. Sweetness.
Just one of those weeks everybody needed a win, needed to pick me up for it's come against Green Bay. It's just easily one of the most memorable games, even if it wasn't necessarily a memorable season for the Chicago Bears.
They had the 34 patch.
Now, the next game comes during what was a surprisingly memorable season, a year in which the Bears were able to go 13-3 under Dick Duran. You almost look back on it as one of the more random seasons that maybe the Bears have had with success. But it just seemed like a lot of things were going their way. And nothing personified that more than what happened on November 4th of that year in 2001, which was really a culmination of a 2-week period here where it just seemed like the Bears had pulled off 2 incredibly improbable wins in a row. But it ends with Mike Brown for the second straight week getting a pick 6 to end the game. And this one, so the actual game we're referencing here is the second of the 2, but this is kind of a 2-for-1 deal here because of how it all played out. But certainly one I think all three of us vividly remember. What you might not remember is Mike Brown did this in back-to-back weeks, first against the 49ers, then second week against the Browns. In both of these games, the Bears looked dead in the water. Like they had no chance to win. And in this one, Shane Matthews throws 2 touchdowns in the last 28 seconds to even send this thing to overtime, including a Hail Mary to James Allen. And it's like, how is any of this happening, let alone for the second straight week for it to happen? Because they looked dead in the water against the 49ers the week before, and then to have it end with Mike Brown getting back-to-back pick 6s to win. It's incredible.
For me, it was the moment I went from a Bears fan to a diehard Bears fan, a fanatic, because that season really captured my emotions. Because prior to that, the 90s, they had some ups and downs, but the 90s were dominated by Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And as a young Greg Braggs, that they had all my attention. And watching the Bears week to week, you didn't have as high expectations. And then Brian Urlacher and Mike Brown came to the Bears, and things started to change, a momentum shift, and it culminated in that moment. And for me, I'll always kind of earmark that as where I kind of turned into this insane meatball that I am today. And at that very moment, I told my mom I hadn't been to a game at Old Soldier Field. That was going to be the last season that games were played at the Old Soldier Field. So I bought a ticket to the last game of that season to make sure I could at least see it in its original form. They ended up winning the division over the Jacksonville Jaguars. Keith Traylor takes an interception, almost takes it to the house. And that team was special. Mike Brown was a special player, who had some tough injuries along the way. If not for those, the Bears could have very well won a Super Bowl down the road, and so that was just a really special year. And that was a really special moment for all of us.
I mean, Mike Brown has a special corner and like really, really good Bears players who don't get talked about enough. Like not a Hall of Fame level, but he was an impact freaking guy. And to the games that we're talking about, I mean, they were down 21-7 with less than a minute to go in the Browns game. Tim Couch, thank you for the interception. 28-9 the week prior, come back and win. Like, that's not exactly very Bear-like, right? Like, they're pulling out miracle victories, the whole thing. That season was so freaking weird, too, because what was normal was that, can we get Dick Duran out of here? Like, it's like, please fire this guy's the most boring dude of all time. But then out of nowhere, dude wins 13 games.
And Jim Miller had an incredible season.
Which, that's another thing. Gentleman Jim does not get enough credit.
Miller time.
That's right. I mean, Jim Miller was one of the great competitors who ever played quarterback for the Bears. That dude got everything out of his ability. Certainly couldn't run, didn't have the strongest arm, but that guy knew how to play.
He was like the wily old Western gun shooter,
Well, and he had it was a whole thing. Like, it was let Miller start. He's the best thing they have, and like Bears fans, like it wasn't like an instant warm up to him, and maybe he never actually became beloved. But the dude when he was going well. Jim Miller was one of the better quarterbacks the Bears have ever had.
This is one of those games that I could still picture exactly where I was in my parents' living room, watching a game for both of them, and I can still remember the play exactly unfolding. You mentioned Tim Couch playing quarterback for the Browns. Can you name who tipped the pass though up in the air?
I should know this, and
already been mentioned on this exact show.
Keith Traylor.
I don't have it.
Ryan Robinson.
Wow,
that was a kind of an obvious one.
So,
whoops.
Well, and that's the thing. When it got
maybe
tipped
Walter
up,
gave him another pinch.
When it got tipped up in the air, just the way the camera angle was, everybody kind of lost it, and even players on the field didn't know. And all of a sudden, Mike Brown is in the end zone.
Well, he caught that thing like full speed ahead.
Right.
Yep.
Like no one had a chance to catch him because, to your point, it's like nobody even realized he had the ball yet.
Right.
And he caught it full speed, in stride, gone.
Yep. It was great.
And the place just went nuts. Very cool. Very cool.
Love Old Soldier Field. That place was horrible.
And just to put it in perspective, the Bears were losing the week before to the 49ers, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
They had to score 15 points in the final 4 minutes of that game just to force overtime. They outscored the 49ers 28-3 to win that game, after being down 28-9 in the third quarter. So both of these wins, completely improbable comebacks.
Mm-hmm.
The way they unfolded, and then just the bonus being that Mike Brown ends it the same way 2 weeks in a row. It's insane.
Well, in my lifetime as a Bears fan, especially from 2000 on, we've had like 4 or 5 years where they've been very good. And it always feels like each year, it's like a team of destiny type thing. They have all these bizarre things happen.
Right.
It's not because they're the best team in the league. I mean, the year they went to the Super Bowl, you could feel that defense was Super Bowl worthy. But even that year had just the insanity of Devin Hester. It's like, it seems like every year, and that year included, there's like all these random acts, random moments that culminate into a playoff run.
That you just hit on a point that I will wait to discuss when we get to the last Bears team that went to the Super Bowl.
Well, I always say you can create your own luck. If
for sure,
by being the more you, and I tell our kids at the high school level the same thing. The more you do things the right way and get yourself in the right position, the better your odds are to have the ball bounce your way. Because if you're not there, you can't pick up the loose ball. You can't, have If you don't get in the habit of putting your arms up at the line of scrimmage, you're never going to tip a pass up in the air.
Right.
So you just, even if it seems like you do it every single time and you only get 1 out of 100, at least you got the 1 out of 100 because you're doing it.
It's one of my favorite sayings. Chance favors the prepared mind.
I've never heard you say that.
One of the weirdest things you've ever said on the show.
Some nuclear physicist said that.
I'm
Something
sure
like
that
that.
was. Mike Brown was a dude who had a nose for the football is what I'm going to say. And that dude did things the right way. And
Mike Brown's one of my favorite Bears of all
Yeah.
time. Easily, and it's a shame. I feel like we were all robbed, and him most especially, of just not being healthy enough and not having him in the Super Bowl.
He was always great at Bourbonnais, and each year, he'd have an injury thing. And I can remember one year he had to use the restroom, and he jumped over the fence of a baseball field, and it was a high fence. And I was like, it was impressive. And then I was like, why don't you chill out there, Mike? Take it easy. Ride the golf cart.
Our next 2 games on this list are more of the individual performance variety.
Me games, love them.
Where we're not talking outstanding seasons or results or anything like that, or even the outcome of the game so much as just 2 badass Bears doing badass things. And we start in 1977 with Walter Payton in what some refer to as his flu game, but 275 rushing yards in this game, which was an NFL single-game record at the time, later broken by Adrian Peterson. But guys got a 101-degree fever, and they're going to give him the ball 40 times, which Carm can tell you why with the quarterback situation.
Yeah, so Bob Avellini, who just passed away, R.I.P. Bob, and Bob had, Bob was a good competitor. Bob had a great personality. Bob was not a very good quarterback. So it was, at the time, it was Payton left, Payton right, Payton up the middle punt. And, that was their offense. Bob Avellini in this game threw 1 pass in the first half, and he threw it to Walter Payton. So, Walter was the team. He was the Bears. And, Michael's got the most famous flu game here, but I think Walter was sicker. 101-degree, temperature, fever, laying on the ground on towels in the locker room before the game. I don't know if they had Gatorade back then in 77, so it's harder to recover. That's 1 touchdown in the game. Of course, Payton scored it, and he crossed to 275 when he took the ball from the 6 to the 2-yard line late in the game. That would have iced it, didn't get in. It was on a 4th down play, but it got him the record that held for a long, long time.
Yeah, he was larger than life. When you talk about why people are Bears fans, and we went to London in 2019, and the 2 things you'd hear the most are the '85 Bears, obviously, and Walter Payton. I've heard this story from so many people that don't live around Chicago, that weren't born into being a Bears fan. Why they became Bears fan is because of that guy right there sitting on the table, Walter Payton. So I didn't have the opportunity to watch him play. Wasn't old enough for it, unfortunately, but his impact on this organization and the history and tradition, and why so many fans have, kind of gravitated to this organization, is obviously because of 34.
Well, and you can, I don't know all the specifics of what went down necessarily to lead to him getting the ball 40 carries on a day where he's that sick. But from what I've read, heard, know about Walter Payton, I'm guessing, whereas you're thinking in most situations, oh no, our star running back is sick, we got to come up with a different game plan here, or at least limit his carries, limit his touches, and maybe only use him in like goal line situation, red zone, 3rd downs, like things that are, the money downs. I'm guessing Walter was like, no, give me the damn rock.
Right.
And he didn't back down from this challenge whatsoever. So one of the more remarkable individual performances in Bears history.
And, it's okay, Jack Pardee. The guy gave it his all, but he wasn't the most creative head coach in the history of the Chicago Bears. Neither was Sid Gilman, the offensive coordinator, apparently. So good thing we got Shane Waldron today, baby.
Well, and it was essentially a record that stood for 30 years, right? Until Adrian Peterson almost got 300 yards. I mean, and that's hard to do. 40 carries, like you said, you're not throwing the ball. So the defense knows what you're going to do. You're stacking the box, and he's doing it anyway. And we've only had so many players in this city that were so great, and you knew what they were about to do, and then they do it anyway. Michael Jordan, Walter Payton.
It was also in the middle of a 6-game win streak, by the way, that did get them in the playoffs, and they got smoked by the Cowboys that year. But they did make the playoffs that season. They finished 9-5.
As we get deeper into some of these games in history, I do want to give a shout out to this book.
Yep.
Because this is one of the greatest books that's ever been put together in the history of the Bears. Probably the best. But the Bears 100 season a few years ago, Don Pearson, obviously legendary sports writer, Bears writer, and Dan Pompei, another legendary Bears and NFL writer, put this scrapbook. They call it a scrapbook because it really is a lot of pictures, a lot of history, and all this stuff. So for some of the deeper stuff, it is great to reference. And that includes our next game on this list because as we go to number 6 and our countdown, the Gale Sayers game. One of the more remarkable careers for as short as it actually was. But December 12th, 1965, in Gale's rookie season, he just goes ahead and scores 6 touchdowns in a game. Here are his stats. He has 336 all-purpose yards in this game. He had 9 handoffs, scored 4 touchdowns on 9 handoffs. He had 2 receptions, scored 1 touchdown on 2 catches, and he returned 5 punts in the game and scored a touchdown on that as well. It was an 85-yard punt return touchdown in the fourth quarter. So the Bears went on to win this game very, very easily.
61-20.
61-20.
61-20.
Yeah.
This is like a college game from the Kansas Comet. And
I was distracted by that 49ers logo. I'm not that we just had on the screen. I
had to look it up. That was their logo at the time.
That's awesome. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Because I was like, I'm pretty sure they were playing the 49ers, but then I didn't recognize that logo that was just on the screen. I'm like, yeah. So it was the 49ers, and it was a blowout win.
Yeah, I mean, he was essentially Devin Hester, but played running back, as well. Like in terms of electricity, and the way he could, make those kind of back cuts and kind of leave players in the dust. And yeah, I mean, obviously the medical science wasn't where it was today. He gets injured and his career is shortened, and that was a real shame. And I can still remember when you bring up the 100th anniversary book and that Bears 100, when they brought Gale Sayers up on the stage and all the legendary players surrounding him. That was a really powerful moment, at that ceremony just a few years ago.
He was, and I'll be in the serious zone for a second here because I wasn't alive to see Gale, and if I could pick any athlete that I would have liked to have been alive that played in this city, I think that would be number one. He was Jordan before there was Jordan. I grew up in a household where my dad played football in high school in the 40s. Football was a big deal, and Gale Sayers was like, the way he was talked about was basically godlike. I mean, whenever he touched the football, he could score a touchdown to the Devin Hester deal.
Right. Give me 18 inches of daylight. That's all I need was his saying.
And, when I did post-game shows and, Hoge was the reporter at the time at WGN, when I would ask Obradovich about Gale Sayers, he'd be like, I'm like, who was better, OB, Gale or Walter? He's like, Gale or Walter? Well, there's no doubt who's starting. Like, that's, the respect that the players had for the insane ability that was Gale Sayers. I mean, it's up there with the all-time greats to ever play the game.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, but a little ahead of his time, right? Because you had the Jim Browns and the Walter Paytons and those types of running backs, but the way he ran the football is what you see more nowadays.
Right. Well, the ability, his
Speed,
cutting ability,
the cutting,
all that was, Walter obviously had a ton of that, but he also could bowl you over. Gale, that wasn't Gale's game. Gale was also doing everything else. He was returning kicks. In the game that we're talking about, he had 134 yards of punt returns, 5 of them in the game. So, It's just a shame, honestly, looking back on it, that and that year, by the way, it's also famously talked about that. I mean, the greatest draft in the history of the Bears: Butkus third, Sayers fourth.
Yeah, and to speak of how good he was so soon, and this is one of the great nuggets you can get in this book, but it's written in here that the 49ers had come up with a special defensive scheme just for this game to stop Gale Sayers. They called it the Chicago defense, and 49ers assistant coach Y.A. Tittle, that won't be your first Y.A. Tittle reference in this show, by the way.
He's coming up.
He's quoted after the game as saying, "I just wonder how many Sayers would have scored if we hadn't set our defense to stop him."
Wow.
That's amazing.
And George Halas, by the way, called it the greatest performance ever by one man on a football field.
And there you go. And by the way, when George Halas spoke back then, he was always considering, if I say something nice, I'm gonna have to pay this guy more. so that was, for him to say that just speaks another level of how good it was.
All right, moving on. That's through our first 5 games on the list. 5 more to go. And it's a big one. The 1986 NFC Championship game. Of course, the 1985 season. NFC Championship played on January 12th, 1986. You got snow falling. You got a dominant Bears team. They just shut another team out. 24-0 over the Rams as the famous 46 defense holds Eric Dickerson to just 46 rushing yards.
So, yeah, there was talk before about Eric Dickerson was going to run wild on the Bears D. And the prior week when they beat the Giants in the divisional round, it wasn't as dominant as they had been. So there was 0.1% concern that the Rams were going to beat the Bears, which was ridiculous because the Bears were, in my mind, the greatest football team to ever play the game that year. But that was a great job by Steven on the pick that he chose. Wilbur picking up the fumble. That you can see the snow coming down, Soldier Field going absolutely bananas. And that year, I've said it a lot on the show, and I'm going to say it again now. It wasn't just Greg Braggs, Adam Hoge, yours truly, and sports fans who were rooting for the Bears that season. They had captured the entire city. They had captured the entire sporting world. That team was so unbelievably iconic, from the Super Bowl shuffle to the fridge and everything else.
They won a Grammy.
Right. I mean, they
just won a Super Bowl. They won a Grammy.
And if I was to quibble with the list of what they got, I would make this a little bit higher because they were going to the Super Bowl. It was an enormous celebratory moment, and it was just an unbelievable time. But, yeah.
I think maybe the reason I had it lower than some of the other games on my list, because we all kind of had our own list and we kind of made a consensus, was that they made it look so easy, which isn't fair to them.
Well, also to Carman's point, they were expected to win. It didn't seem like there was a lot of doubt over the outcome. And, of course, there wasn't 24-0. Just speak to also the confidence level that this team has, which I think on the list of all-time teams that just believed in their ability so much and their ability to win and be cocky about it. Obviously, the Super Bowl shuffle proving that. But in this scrapbook, it also mentions that Buddy Ryan predicted that Eric Dickerson would fumble 3 times in this game. And he went out and he only fumbled actually twice. But, of course, the 52-yard final touchdown being a fumble recovery.
Did you sneak into Soldier Field that day?
No, I didn't have the ability at the time. I think if memory serves, I mean, sometimes I had friends who would take me to games, but the only game I remember going to that year was week 1 against Tampa. So I remember coming down, old man Carman, I remember coming down Super Bowl morning and just thinking, there is no chance they're losing. None. And then Walter fumbled, and they were down 3-0, and it was or 3-3, whatever it was. I don't remember exactly, but I do remember and it was oh no. And then it was okay, 46-10. See you later. We'll get to the Super Bowl in a second. But like they were so good and so dominant that it was that team was. They were insane. They were insane.
Also worth pointing out, I don't know if it's probably tailed off over the years, but the Bears and Rams fringe rivals, I'd say, over time.
Okay.
I mean, if you in this book where it lists the rivalries, the Rams are one of them. And so not necessarily
like out of division rivals.
Yeah,
them and the Eagles, it feels like we always seem to run into.
And one of the games that we did discuss making this list and didn't make the cut was the 2018 game against the Rams that the Bears dominated in cold weather and ultimately set the blueprint for what Bill Belichick used defensively, changed his whole defense up in the Super Bowl that year to beat that Rams team.
Yep. That was the best game of the 2018 season, which was a very fun season.
Right. And so I think it was rightly discussed as an option. I think we have it correct that it's not in here, but that is another memorable Bears-Rams game on the list.
Well, and you have the Devin Hester 2 touchdowns on Monday Night Football against the Rams, too. That's one of my personal favorite games of all time.
When they were in St. Louis.
But quickly before we move on, by the way, Jim McMahon threw a 22-yard touchdown pass to Willie Gall in that game. He also ran one in from 16 yards out. Oh, it was so great when the Bears had a quarterback.
Excuse me? We have a quarterback.
That's what
Caleb
I'm leading
Williams.
into. That I'm leading into.
I see.
And even better one is going to stay healthy.
Did
the whole
Caleb
thing.
Williams' OTA practice make the list here at number 4?
It was number 46 on the list. Well, and this is where things kind of get into a little bit of a debate, and you can blame the age of this panel, perhaps, but I think because of what we just talked about with almost how certain it seemed to be that they were going to win that NFC Championship game against the Rams.
Right.
We've ranked the 2006, that's actually the 2007 technically, NFC Championship game from the 2006 season, one notch ahead of the one that the 85 Bears had. So this was the second Super Bowl the Bears have made, and they did so in pretty convincing fashion in this football game, ultimately winning 39-14 over the New Orleans Saints. But this one was...
The score's deceiving, though, Hoge.
Yeah.
I mean, it was convincing by the end, but halfway through the game when Reggie Bush scampers into the end zone and points at Brian Urlacher, it was like, game on.
Yeah.
And that pissed the Bears off something furious. And then that's what led to the barrage as the rest of the game went away. I mean, we talk about the Bears being a team of destiny in these random, unique years. The Saints that year were the team of destiny. They had just their city in New Orleans had just gone through Hurricane Katrina. Everybody, it felt like, was rooting for New Orleans because of that. Drew Brees had become this superstar in that moment. Now he's on his way to the Hall of Fame. And it didn't feel like the Bears were the favorites, even though they were playing at home that day. You got Rex Grossman, who was almost somewhat playing on borrowed time at that point, because while the Bears had a great season, as the season went on, they were winning in spite of him a lot of times, as opposed to how he played at the start of the year where he won like Player of the Month and had some outstanding games. So going into that game, Rex Grossman versus Drew Brees, we're like, oh boy, here we go. Everybody wants the Saints to win. The league wants the Saints to win. And the Bears just eventually bowled them over. And my memory of Rex, the bomb to Bernard Berrien as he's rolling into the end zone. And again, so many moments here in this city where the Bears win a playoff game, and at the very end, the snow starts to come down. This game also featured that. And then to have Virginia McCaskey hoist the George Halas Trophy with Brian Urlacher, it just all the way around was a very special day.
That was the thing about that team. I need to be more specific. The Rex Grossman part of that team always irked me because I just felt like you can't win with this dude as your quarterback. But in that game, I mean, he was 11 of 26, 144 yards, and it was a tight game, at least midway through the second half when the Bears pulled away. But you go back through that year, I mean, they were killing teams to start the season.
Because the thing that people forget is, while Rex had his flaws, if you go back and look, they were number 1 in the league in defense. They had Devin Hester, so they're the best special teams, not even a question, Robbie Gould. But they were also number 1 in the league in offense, and that's because they ran the football. And the picture you used with Thomas Jones, that was the identity of this team.
196 rushing yards in this NFC Championship.
196 rushing yards. Cedric Benson really started to ascend to end the year. Thomas Jones just bludgeoning people. You had Olin Kreutz up front, Jason McKee paving the way. And again, teams knew they were running it in the I formation, and they still couldn't stop it because of the mentality that the offensive line, they had a bunch of veterans, Roberto Garza, Reuben Brown. They had great players up front and a nastiness to them. They got off the bus running the football, as Lovie Smith liked to say. And the Saints, ultimately, they really didn't want to be there that day. Like that's how it felt. And I can also remember like the grass. They like made sure not to cut the grass those 2 weeks leading up to that, or that week leading up to the game. Like make it as tough and nasty as you possibly can. I can remember Marcus Colston coming across the middle and getting laid out by Briggs and Urlacher. Like they weren't going to have it that day. It was the Bears' day.
I'm glad you mentioned J-Mac, because shout out to Jason McKee, because he had a block in this game on a Thomas Jones touchdown where he took out 2 Saints with 1 block out of the fullback position.
Shout out J-Mac. We got you.
And yeah, just a fun one of the more memorable days. And I think going back to the original thing, this game was much more in doubt in terms of if the Bears should win it going into the game. And then while the score was comfortable at the end, and we also had Robbie Gould's stats up on the screen too. I mean, they from all 3 phases, they were the better team. I felt like the Bears had this thing in control at home with the weather in their favor. Fun day though. It's older.
That was
you there?
It was a 16-14 game in the third quarter. The Bears scored the last 23 points unanswered.
Were either you there? Were you there?
I was not.
No. Okay.
I was at my friend Tom Herr's house, and I was drinking heavily. I had just turned 21 that year, so that was a special year.
Brags in the stands hadn't been hatched at that point. You were still degenerate at home.
No, I was cutting bootleg Devin Hester DVDs and running to training camps, telling everyone that would listen that Devin Hester was going to revolutionize the league. No one would listen to me before the year started, and by the end of that year, everybody had a Devin Hester jersey on.
And now he's going to the Hall of Fame.
Now he's going to the
let's talk about one of the most legendary Devin Hester games.
I'm going to sit back and just let Braggs talk for 5 minutes here. Go ahead.
And I'm nailing these segues.
The best you've ever done. Number 3, the crown their ass game. October 16th, 2006. Legendary Northwestern head coach, Denny Green.
My guy.
People forget that.
Ended the losing streak. Thank you.
With one of the most memorable, and that really is, honestly, as cool of a game as this is, as we'll talk about, the post-game press conference also puts this higher up on the list in the whole grand story of the game.
100%.
It would still be what it is, but not quite to the level without Dennis Green going off saying the Bears are who we thought they were, and we let them off the hook so angrily. The offense in this game accounted for 0 points, and special teams and defense took over. And what was so weird about this, too, is because the Bears, as you guys mentioned, were scoring a lot of points early on in the season. They had 34 against the Lions. They had 37 against the Seahawks. They had 40 against the Bills. And then all of a sudden, in week 6, they go to Arizona. And Rex Grossman, before you go off on how great Devin Hester is, going to what Carman was just talking about with Grossman, this might have been the worst quarterback game of all time.
It's up there.
I mean, he had 4 interceptions and 2 fumbles lost, and the Bears somehow won in spite of him. And I remember a couple years ago during COVID, when I was working at NBC, we were looking for content to try to, do when the whole sports world was shut down. And I think NBC showed this game on TV just to fill their own programming. So we did some content around it. And I remember rewatching this game from start to finish, not just the highlights, and wanting to just throw things across the room with how bad the quarterback play was. And I didn't actually have to live that in that moment because a lot of that, the first half struggles, the Bears looked dead in the water at halftime. I had a flag football game that night at the University of Wisconsin, so I actually missed the first half, came back to our apartment, got to see all the good stuff that happened in the second half, but my God, the quarterback play was terrible. Everything else was great, though.
Yeah, I mean, I had a party at my house, 20 people over. I mean, the Bears were undefeated at this point in the season.
6-0, baby.
So, at this point, I can remember we dressed up as Bears super fans for Halloween, and we're singing about the Super Bowl and Team of Destiny. And so in that game, the air got completely let out, for the first half of that game, and it was like reality was striking. And then all of a sudden, the halftime, there's a video that you can find where Olin Kreutz is leading the halftime huddle in the locker room, telling the players like, hey, we're going to win this effing game. And we didn't see this video till years later, but like that is how they came out in the second half. And, like I said, the defense, Peanut Tillman, scoop and score, Brian Urlacher, all these guys paving the way to the moment of Devin Hester returning this punt for a touchdown, Mike Tirico on the call. It still puts chills down my back to this moment. Half of my party had left at halftime. So the diehards remain.
It was 20-0.
So we earned the win at the end, the ones that stuck around. And Devin makes a cut. Brendan Iambadejo, a player that is not talked about enough through the history of Devin Hester's path to now becoming a Hall of Famer. He lays 2 blocks on this play, one to initially spring him open, and then 50 yards downfield gets the final seal to kind of fend off the last 2 guys that are trailing Devin Hester, who probably may or may not have caught him regardless, but it just showed you the effort that the special teams put in. Peanut Tillman, guys that were integral parts of the defense, wanted to play special teams to block for Devin Hester. And so that, to me, arguably could be this game could be number 1 on our list if you're just going off of most memorable game of all time, craziest game of all time, Hall of Fame moments within this game. We just had Aaron Schatz on, and he's an analytical guy, created DVOA. He said it was, by metrics, the most improbable win in NFL history. The offense did not score a point. They were down 20-0, and the Bears won the game without scoring on offense. That is as improbable as it gets. And then you forget the fact that after Devin Hester gets the punt return for the lead, the Cardinals and Matt Leinart get into field goal range. And they miss the field goal to win it. And it was a very makeable. I think it was like a 43-yarder. He misses, and that's how it ends. And Denny Green,
Cody Parkey range.
Right. Denny Green, rightfully so, just completely losing his mind. Couldn't catch a break in that game. And then he says after the game, the Bears are who we thought they were, referencing that they had played him in the preseason. And he's like, and we let him off the hook, and slams the podium. And I'll never forget, I don't know who the reporter was in the crowd, but he goes, "Thanks, coach."
Just to wrap this up, because we got to keep it moving, but to that point about how improbable it is, it's 23-3 even late in the third quarter.
Right.
That's when Mike Brown gets the 3-yard defensive fumble return for a touchdown, and the tide starts to turn. Charles Tillman then, but it's still 23-10 deep into the fourth. Charles Tillman with 5 minutes to go, 40-yard defensive fumble return.
Brian Urlacher ripping it out, which they could have called, stoppage of play on continuation.
And then Hester's punt return with just under 3 minutes to go, 83 yards to take the lead. This always happens every time this game is discussed. Somewhat buried in this game is it might have been Brian Urlacher's best game ever.
Yep.
He had 19 tackles in this football game. He had 3 tackles for loss. He hit the quarterback 3 times, and he had that crucial forced fumble that you just mentioned, Braggs. On the list of all-time Urlacher games, this is up there. And to your point earlier, for me, in my lifetime and the games I've witnessed in person, this is easily number 1 for me. Over that NFC Championship win over the Saints, even though it sent them to the Super Bowl. If I had to pick the exact moment, I'm probably going Hester's kickoff return to open the Super Bowl, but they didn't win that game. It's obviously not on this list as the greatest Bears games, but this is number 1 for me, just in terms of the ones of my lifetime that I've been able to watch, because it was just insane how it all came together. Final thought on this, Carm, before we move on?
My final thought is that Rex Grossman was 14 to 37 for 144 yards and threw 4 interceptions.
I'm surprised he even got 144 yards out the deal.
Can you guess what his passer rating was?
0?
It was actually higher than that.
1.8.
It was give him more credit, 10.2.
All right.
I'm sorry.
It was bad. And honestly, it's going back to what I was just saying about rewatching the game. It was worse when this, as bad as the stats are, it was worse watching it.
The high kick though of Devin getting in the end zone is really my last takeaway. That was just,
I can still remember Mike Tirico. Devin Hester breaks into the open field. Devin Hester's got one man to beat. He beat him. Devin Hester all the way. Touchdown, Chicago Bears. I will never forget the call. One of the all-time great calls. And
we'll let Tirico do it.
Yeah.
No, I did it. I just nailed it.
Good. That's pretty good.
That was great.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We have 2 more to go here. Number 2 on our list, we're going to have to go to our resident 1940 expert here in Mark Carman.
Get your media fedora on.
I mean, this is one of the most dominant wins. It is the most famous score in NFL history. 73-0 win over the Washington Redskins in the 1940 NFL Championship game, December 8th, 1940. Most points ever scored by one team in an NFL game. It tied the largest margin of victory by any team in 4 major sports. That's a good nugget there, which is an NBA game. 2021 Memphis Grizzlies won the game by 73 points. And then I didn't know this final game ever played without a helmet.
Wow. I know all the research that I did on this game. I didn't realize that either. But Adam and Greg, it all started 3 weeks earlier when they were at Griffith Stadium in Washington and lost to the then Redskins.
That's even crazier. They lost
7-3.
They lost 7-3, and the Bears, after the game, they were not pleased. They thought a pass interference call should have been made in the end zone. It wasn't there. And the Redskins owner at the time, George Preston Marshall, that clown, he called the Bears crybabies, quitters, and front runners. So Hallis, to his genius, he put that up for him. This is what they're saying about you. The great George Hallis statue outside of Soldier Field, where hopefully, good job meeting with Pritzker earlier in the week here, buddy, or whenever that was. Good job there. But the point is that the Bears were highly motivated to tell George Preston Marshall that you're an idiot. And Hallis is thinking, gentlemen, this is what George Preston Marshall thinks of you. Well, I think you're a great football team, the greatest ever assembled. Now go out there. And I'd like to shout out my guy, Bill Osmanski, one of your favorites too, Greg. Osmanski, second play from scrimmage. The fullback taking it 68 yards for a touchdown. He, of course, was the 6th overall pick in 1939 in that draft. We were talking about Butkus and Sayers 3 and 4. Don't forget about Luckman, 2nd overall in 39. Osmanski was 6th overall, Hoge. The Luckman-Osmanski combo doesn't get talked about enough here.
Yeah. Well, that's why you're here.
That is why I'm here.
To represent Osmanski.
21 zip after 13 minutes of the Osmanski family. 28 zip. You know what? We should talk. You want to talk more about Osmanski? We can. He went into
we don't need to because we need to wrap the show up, actually.
Well, he did go in the Marine Corps, and he did serve in Guam and Okinawa. I think you wanted to know that, Osmansky. But he
Show some respect to Osmansky.
I'm trying to allow you some time here to mention one of your honorable mentions because I know that you're going to defend the quarterback you always want to defend.
Yeah, I do.
Couple of last nuggets, though, on this 73-0 win. This is from the Bears scrapbook. They actually almost ran out of footballs in this game. After the Bears went up 66-0, teams were not allowed to kick extra points because they only had one football left. And if you hit the extra points, the balls would go in the end zone or in the stands, and they would lose them. Also, after the game, Washington quarterback Sammy Baugh was asked whether an early drop pass in the end zone altered the tone of the game, to which Sammy Baugh replied, "It would have been 73-7."
That's right. That's my guy, Sammy Baugh. By the way, you know how many passes Luckman threw in that game, Hoge?
I don't.
3 for 4 for 88 yards. That was
efficiency.
Yeah. I don't know how you score 73 points with your quarterback throwing it 4 times. They had a backup quarterback.
You said Y.A. Tittle was going to make this list.
Y.A. Tittle is
he's not going to make the list, but he's going to make a reference here in a little bit.
If we get there.
Honorable mention.
But we've got to let Carm, talk about his love.
Do you have the Osmansky family tree on you, by any chance?
Well,
seems like you're prepared.
Well, his older brother played with his younger brother, younger Osmansky was on the 46 Bears championship
Is that his name,
team.
Younger Osmansky?
Yes. Well, and we didn't even get into Hampton Poole and George McAfee and Bulldog Turner all at pick sixes in the 73-0 win, but we'll talk about them another time.
All right, number one on this list. Somewhat anticlimactic. No, it is not Caleb Williams' first practice as a Chicago Bear. It is Super Bowl 20. You may have heard of it. January 26, 1986. Just a dominant performance over the New England Patriots. The best highlight of watching the Patriots in this game is just their old school uniforms that they were wearing at the time. The defense shut them down. Only 7 rushing yards for the Patriots in this game. And, of course, as you can see on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, the fridge, getting the handoff, the heaviest player ever to score in Super Bowl history. The only negative that is still talked about to this day, and there were some regrets over it, but Walter Payton did not score a touchdown.
Stupidest thing ever that didn't happen.
And Ditka admitted as much.
Well, yeah, he admitted it, and just pretty unbelievable. But that was part of the, it was sort of the Hollywood thing of the Bears at that time, like, the fridge getting in the end zone and catching passes, rumbling in the end zone, and McMahon would talk about how handling the ball, he would kind of just envelop the football, and basically McMahon was where he's going to rip his shoulder off as he was going in there. But pure and utter dominance, baby. And one day they'll get back there, Gregory.
Yep.
One day.
No, I look forward to it. But no, like we've talked about so many times here through this top 10 and different games they were in, that the aura around this team and the national celebrity that they all became, the Super Bowl shuffle, so many Bears fans to this day are Bears fans because of that team. Internationally, they became a global sensation. When you talk about Michael Jordan putting the city of Chicago on the map, the Bears, the 85 Bears, did that first. And this was at a time where sports media isn't where it is today. So once a team was able to hit a global atmosphere, it was rarefied air, and they hit that rarefied air.
Well, since you brought Jordan into it, his second season, he broke his foot, missed 64 games. There was 4,000 people coming to see Bulls games when he was gone at that point. And the Bears came and played at halftime of one of the games against one of the dregs of the NBA, Cleveland, and Chicago Stadium was sold out to see the Bears play basketball at halftime for 10 minutes.
Yeah. I remember when they used to go to high school gyms and play basketball. It was, they loved it.
Yeah,
loved it.
Yeah, and also in that game, for the record, 46-10, the game's well over in the fourth quarter. The fans were coming down to the bench and they were throwing beers to the Bears who started drinking. while they were still on the sidelines, reportedly.
Well, they were drinking all week, right? I mean, you had
Yeah.
Jim McMahon mooning the helicopter. They're out all night. It was in New Orleans. The Super Bowl is in New Orleans this year.
Whatever. Mark Burley had a save in the World Series while he was 6 beers in.
That's true.
All right. Congrats to you, Greg Braggs Jr., because all 10 of the games you submitted were the 10 we ended up with
Really?
in our list. The order changed a little bit based on
I
the
didn't
input
notice
from
that. I am
Carm and
pretty
myself.
smart.
Carm, you had 2 games that did not make the list. I'll give you a second here to talk about. I have to passionately make the case for one honorable mention that I think I had not only in my top 10, but like 6th or 7th, somewhere up there. I don't think this game gets talked about enough. I think the whole storyline around it and the results of it, the players involved, including one of our teammates. But the Bears' 2010 victory in Minnesota, to me, should be on this list. It starts the week prior with the Metrodome roof collapsing.
Yeah.
In just a joke of a stadium to begin with. But the Metrodome was loud, and it was a hard place to win in when you came in there. And I remember it being in there for football games. It got really loud, and it collapsed because of a snowstorm. So the Vikings played their first game at TFC Bank Stadium, where the Gophers play their home games. And that was a new stadium at the time, and it ends up being a super cold. The ground's hard because I don't think that turf field was heated.
No, that stadium isn't built to be played that time
right,
of year.
because their games are over in November.
Right.
So, but you have so you have those pregame circumstances that go into it. You have the thing we talk about all the time with our guy Corey Wooten here, that was the game where he sacked Brett Favre, and that was Brett Favre's last game. And Corey Wooten ended Favre. And just like when you think about the history of Brett Favre with the Bears and how much pain he caused the Bears, that is a memorable moment to have happen there that we all remember. Devin Hester had a 64-yard punt return touchdown in that game.
To break the record.
Yep. Which was, come on, he breaks the record. And on top of that, the Bears won the NFC North that night.
Yep.
With that win. So to have all of those things happen on the same night, that game should definitely be in this list. And you guys didn't even mention it.
No,
Screw you.
It definitely, it was a tough list, and you had to balance different criteria. But you're right. From unique circumstance to Hall of Fame moments to winning the division in terms of impact for the franchise. Devin Hester, after that game, had probably the most memorable post-game press conference. Were you covering the team at that time?
I was, but not the road games, so I was not there.
He was in tears as he had broken the record, talking about how much his teammates meant to him. And for me, that was what embodied, beyond the electricity that Devin Hester brought on the field, the teammate and leader that Devin Hester was doesn't get talked about enough. And you're right, maybe the most iconic tackle. You say, Otis Wilson laying out the Lions player in the iconic photo where he's literally gravitating over the field. That one probably is up there, but Corey Wooten, ending Brett Favre's career, with a final tackle, and Henry Melton, who we just had in studio, adding the little extra sauce at the end, as Henry said, you did. So, that was a great, great day to be a Bears fan.
All right, Carm. You get 2 games here to mention to wrap us up. I know here's the Y.A. Tittle reference because he was the Giants quarterback in the 1963 NFL title game.
I was not leaving until I get my second Y.A. Tittle reference.
Well, they did win an NFL championship in 1963, so I did think that belonged on the list. Dateline, Wrigley Field, Dateline Y.A. Tittle, Dateline Y.A. Tittle getting picked off. Billy Wade running in for a couple of touchdowns. The Bears 11-1-2 that year. Unbelievable defense. They gave up just 10 points per game. My guy Ed Obradovich, a big part of that. 17 total touchdowns allowed. They had 36 interceptions. There was a tight end by the name of, I think it was Mike Ditka, who caught 59 balls that year for 794 yards. 63 doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but that was the first, that was their last championship before 85. Won it at home. Obradovich threw his helmet famously into the crowd. He was fined by George Hallis $500 for that because Hallis was an asshole at times. How's that? I'll soften it up. Come on, let your guy throw his helmet into the crowd, not fine him $500, you cheap jerk. But 63 I thought belonged on the list.
Yeah.
And the other one's it's just personally my favorite game. They're down. Jim McMahon was in traction, hadn't practiced all week. It was a Thursday night game. They're playing up in Minnesota. McMahon's begging him. And the Bears finally, Ditka realizes they're going to lose. All right, get in there, Jim. It was the third game of the year. And
which season?
This is the 85 year. And he comes off the bench in the third quarter, first pass, 70-yard bomb to Willie Gault as Walter Payton picking up the block, which was unbelievable. And then he throws a 25-yard touchdown pass to Dennis McKinnon and a 43-yard pass to McKinnon. So the Bears went from down 17-9 to leading 30-17 to winning 33-24. And it was a Jordan-esque, off-the-bench, insane, hadn't practiced, clutch Jim McMahon moment that honestly, for me, basically tops anything on the list as far as experiences watching the game. That was unbelievable.
I think a good case for that game to make the list because, that's obviously such a memorable season. They were almost too good to have other good games. Yeah, top 10 games because they were, too good. But
right.
That one, obviously, the circumstances of being behind, the decision made to put McMahon in, and then the performance afterwards, I think good cases for all three of those games that we didn't put on this list.
Yeah, quickly, my couple honorable mentions that killed me not to bring on the list, but Peanut Tillman's 4 forced fumbles against the Titans. Brian Urlacher,
yes,
he returns a pick 6 in Tennessee, Nashville. Bears fans completely took over the stadium that day. I think they ran the town dry of Miller Lite beer. They completely ran out of light beer. I'll never forget that. But the 4 forced fumbles, something that always resonates with me. We could have had Devin Hester's 2 against the Rams on Monday Night Football wearing the white on whites, 2 against the Broncos. The next year he did it again. There was so many Devin Hester moments that we could have left, that we did leave off here, including first game of his career against the Packers. Devin Hester takes it to the house. But the one game that didn't make the list, but the one moment and game, because they clinched the NFC Championship, was in that 2001 season. Keith tractor trailer, interception, looking back, trying to hand it off, goes rumbling, bumbling, stumbling for 70 yards. It's the first game I was ever at, so I'm impartial to this. It has a little bit of heartstrings to it, but they did win the division that day. It was the final regular season game at the original Soldier Field. Last win at the original Soldier Field. That Keith tractor trailer moment is played every single year for Bears fans, and it was also a rescheduled game because it was supposed to be played on 9/11, ends up getting moved to the end of the year, and that's when the Bears won the division. So there was just uniqueness. Bears win the division. Keith tractor trailer moment. Doesn't make the list, but certainly noteworthy.
I don't know that any name has been mentioned more in this show than Devin Hester. It's come up over and over again with different games. Yep. So if you're a weirdo who still doesn't think that he's deserving to be in the Hall of Fame, I think just listening to this show for an hour should help you understand the greatness and the impact that he really had on so many different games.
Well, you're seeing it now. Rome Odunze, Caleb Williams, they talk about how Rome says he's his favorite player of all time. Now he's getting into the Hall of Fame in a few weeks. And for so many of us, he's our favorite Chicago Bear of all time. And for me personally, that will never change. And if we ever get the chance to interview him here on this show, I'll probably cry like a 10-year-old girl the entire interview.
He was a great specialist.
You are
Please
special.
don't cry. You are very special. This has been a special show. I've greatly enjoyed having these discussions about these games. This was a fun one. Presented by Miller Lite, our top 10 Chicago Bears games ever. on the CHGO Bears Podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.